Okay, so let's get right into it. If you've been following political news at all, you've almost certainly seen the headlines. The story goes that young men, specifically Gen Z, are taking this hard right turn, kicking off a whole new conservative wave. But is that what's really going on? We're going to take a look at the data. I know, it's a pretty harsh way to put it, but honestly, according to our source material, this is how a lot of the pundit class seems to see young men these days. On one side, they're painted as the leaders of this new bro-inflected right-wing movement, and on the other, they're treated like this huge, complicated puzzle that just needs to be solved.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're digging into today. Is this whole narrative, this idea of a massive political shift among young men, actually backed up by the numbers? Or is there something else happening that all those headlines are missing?
Yeah, some people are literally calling this the Gen Z men panic. It's this theory that young guys are pretty much single-handedly driving America's recent shift to the right. And look, this isn't just chatter on the internet. It's being taken very seriously by some major political players. And to give you a sense of just how seriously, that's $20 million. That's how much the Democratic Party is reportedly pouring into a huge, multi-year project just to understand and try to win back young male voters. That is a massive investment, and it's all based on this one prevailing story. So you have to ask, where is this all coming from? To figure that out, we need to zoom in on the specific piece of evidence that, well, everyone seems to be pointing to. The main source fueling this panic is something called the General Social Survey, or the GSS. It's a really well-respected, long-running survey of American adults, and it's the bedrock for a lot of those viral charts you've probably seen making the rounds online. And when you first look at that GSS data on how conservative people say they are, the trend seems pretty undeniable. You see these charts where it looks like young men and young women are just flying apart politically, with men veering way off to the conservative side. But there's a catch. So here it is. This is the number at the very heart of the panic, 0.26. That's the actual size of the gap in conservativeness between young men and young women in the 2024 GSS data. Now, that probably doesn't sound like a huge number, and whether it is or not, well, it all comes down to context. And here is the context that changes absolutely everything. That 0.26 gap, it's measured on a 7-point scale, running all the way from most liberal to most conservative. So what that means is that this supposedly massive, dramatic split between young men and women is actually less than half a point on that scale. All of a sudden, it doesn't quite sound like the political earthquake the headlines are making it out to be, does it? If a trend is real, you'd expect to find it in more than just one data set, right? So let's take a look at a different and really robust source, the American National Election Studies, or ANEs, and see if this story actually holds up. Okay, so let's break down what the ANES data tells us. First, while it's true that young men are more likely to say they're Republican than young women are, that gap hasn't really changed in over a decade. It's stable. But when it comes to how they actually vote, the gap has been getting smaller. In fact, in 2024, there was no real difference in how likely they were to vote Republican. And what's more, this gender gap, men being a bit more likely to lean Republican than women, it's not some new weird Gen Z thing. Data from the Pew Research Center shows that this gap exists pretty consistently across all age groups. So young men aren't the political oddballs they're being made out to be.
So if the big story isn't some new generational gender crisis, then what is it? The author of our source material makes a really compelling case that we've all been looking at the wrong thing. The real, dramatic, political divide in America today, it's not about gender. It's about education.
And the data on this is just wow. It's striking. Since 2012, people with college degrees have moved and moved decisively toward the Democratic Party. That's true for both how they identify and how they vote. And at the same time, they've moved away from the Republican Party. This isn't some tiny little shift. It's a huge, consistent political realignment that's happening across every age group. So when you put these two trends right next to each other, the real story just jumps out at you. The political gap between genders, it's been pretty stable for over a decade. But the gap based on education, it has exploded. This is telling us that the most significant political sorting happening right now is happening along educational lines, not generational ones. So why does getting this right matter so much? Well, it's about understanding the danger of slicing up the electorate into these tiny little demographic groups. When we do that, we risk missing the bigger picture of what's actually shaping American politics. The reality is, demographics can often be pretty poor predictors of how an election will turn out. A group's loyalty to a party can change on a dime. One single huge event, a recession, a war, a major scandal, can completely shatter political coalitions overnight. And in the end, elections are won and lost because huge swaths of the population swing one way or the other, not because of the specific habits of one tiny group. And that is really the main takeaway from all this. When we focus so intensely on one small slice of the population, like Gen Z men, we're really risking missing the forest for the trees. The much bigger forces, things like the economy, major world events, and these broad realignments based on education, are way more powerful in predicting our political future.
So we'll leave you with this final thought from the source article. Maybe the key isn't to try and decode Gen Z men like they're some strange new species from another planet. Maybe it's to understand the much bigger, more powerful trends that are reshaping politics for absolutely everyone. And that's something we're thinking about the next time you see a headline about a generational political shift.